Clothing store employee kicks out an elderly man for thinking he's poor, but when the manager arrives.
Hello everyone. Enjoy these relaxing moments while you watch.
Carla, a young saleswoman with wavy brown hair tied up high, stood beside the cash register. Her neatly ironed uniform hugged her body, giving her a professional and sharp look. Carla glanced around the store, her eyes flashing coldly whenever she spotted a customer who didn't look particularly wealthy. "Lucy, do you see that? It's those people again, the ones who just come in to browse," Carla whispered, loud enough for her nearby colleague to hear. Lucy, the new intern, only offered a shy smile, too nervous to respond. The sound of creaking shoes echoed as Mr. Phillip entered the store. The elderly man, likely in his 70s, wore a faded brown coat and a pair of old leather shoes. His white hair was neatly combed, and his kind eyes sparkled with curiosity and cheerfulness. He looked around the store, seemingly captivated by the beauty of the expensive garments. Carla immediately noticed him. She smirked slightly, her expression betraying her disdain. "Who walks in here looking like that?" she thought to herself. Mr. Phillip approached a clothing rack displaying a charcoal gray suit with impeccable tailoring. He leaned in to examine the fine details, his eyes lighting up with admiration. After a few moments, he gently called out, "Miss, how much does this suit cost?" Carla, who had been leaning against the counter, lazily made her way over. She looked Mr. Phillip up and down, her lips curving into a mocking smile. "This suit?" Carla said coldly. "Sir, this is an exclusive designer piece. I don't think it's suitable for you." Mr. Phillip's gentle smile remained. "I just want to know the price. Can you tell me?" Carla let out a derisive laugh, loud enough to draw the attention of a few nearby customers. "Sir, this suit isn't meant for someone like you. If you're interested, I can show you some discounted items outside." As soon as she finished speaking, the atmosphere in the store seemed to freeze. A few customers exchanged surprised glances, shocked by Carla's attitude. Lucy, feeling embarrassed, lowered her head and stayed silent. Mr. Phillip appeared momentarily taken aback, but he quickly regained his composure. "Thank you," he said softly, his tone calm but tinged with sadness. He turned and walked out of the store, leaving behind curious stares and murmurs from the other customers. Outside, the chilly evening air enveloped the city of Santa Fe. Mr. Phillip walked slowly along the cobblestone street, his hands tucked into the pockets of his coat. His face held a trace of sadness, but his kind eyes remained unchanged. "Maybe I shouldn't have gone in there. I just wanted to admire the clothes," he thought to himself. Back in the store, Carla returned to the counter, looking smug. She picked up a cup of coffee, took a sip, and glanced at Lucy. "See? People like him just waste our time," Carla said mockingly. Lucy hesitated. "But, he didn't do anything wrong. He just wanted to look." Carla raised an eyebrow. "Look. This is a high-end store, not a museum. We cater to customers who are worth it, not those who are here to window shop." In the corner of the store, a middle-aged customer named Maria, who had been browsing, shook her head disapprovingly. She turned to another employee and whispered, "I don't like her attitude. That elderly gentleman seemed so polite." The employee, looking uneasy, simply gave a nervous smile. Carla, oblivious to all this, continued working as if nothing had happened, entirely unaware of the negative impression she had left on many customers. Mr. Phillip's slender figure disappeared into the bustling crowd on the street. His slow, deliberate steps blended into the fast-paced rhythm of the city, like a somber note in an otherwise lively melody. That image, fleeting as it was, left an indescribable heaviness in the hearts of those who witnessed it. In a nearby cafe, Mr. Phillip stopped and sat down at a wooden chair by the window. He ordered a cup of black coffee and gazed at the luxurious garments displayed in the store from afar. A waiter, Miguel, brought the coffee to his table and noticed the sadness etched on the elderly man's face. "Can I help you with anything, sir?" Miguel asked sincerely. Mr. Philip shook his head and gave a faint smile. "No, thank you, young man. It's just, sometimes life makes you feel a little sad." Meanwhile, Carla continued her work in the store as if nothing had happened. She stood behind the register, adjusting her hair, and then turned to Lucy, the petite intern quietly folding clothes. Carla smirked and spoke proudly, "Lucy, do you know why I'm successful here? Because I don't waste time on people who don't bring value to the store. That's how you maintain a high-end brand." Lucy didn't respond, keeping her head down. But inside, she felt uneasy about Carla's behavior. Though she had only been working there for a few weeks, Lucy had already noticed Carla's discriminatory attitude toward customers she deemed unworthy. At the display counter on the other side of the store, Anthony, a middle-aged sales associate, was chatting with a regular customer named Isabel. Anthony, a calm and experienced professional, had witnessed many awkward situations caused by Carla's attitude but always tried to avoid direct conflict. As Isabel browsed for an evening gown, she tilted her head and asked Anthony, "Who is that young woman over there? Her attitude seems a bit disrespectful." Anthony sighed and replied softly, "That's Carla, a young saleswoman who's excellent at generating sales. But I've noticed that sometimes her arrogance overshadows her ability to treat customers well." Isabel nodded, her expression showing clear disapproval. "I overheard her talking to that elderly gentleman earlier. It's such a shame. An attitude like that doesn't match a high-end store." Anthony didn't know how to respond. He glanced at Carla from across the store and saw her still looking smug, unaware of the dissatisfied looks being directed at her. Meanwhile, Mr. Philip had left the cafe and was strolling along the cobblestone streets of Santa Fe. He stopped in front of a small flower shop where vibrant bouquets were beautifully arranged. The shop owner, a middle-aged woman named Martha, greeted him with a warm smile. "Mr. Philip, how are you today?" Martha asked, her hands deftly tying a bouquet. Mr. Philip nodded and gave a faint smile. "I'm fine, thank you. Just taking a little walk." Martha looked at him with concern. "You seem a bit down. Is something bothering you?" Mr. Philip shook his head. "It's just a small matter, Martha. Not worth worrying about." Martha didn't press further, but she felt sympathy for the elderly man. Having known Mr. Philip for many years, she understood that he was a kind and dignified man who led a simple life with a strong sense of self-respect. She handed him a small bouquet of flowers and smiled gently. "These are for you. Let them brighten your day." Mr. Philip accepted the flowers and thanked Martha before continuing his walk. Although the kind gesture eased his spirit somewhat, the image of the fashion store still lingered in his mind. Carla's mocking laughter, the curious stares from the other customers, all of it felt like an invisible wound, making him feel small in this vast world. Back at the store, Carla was recounting the story of Mr. Philip to a group of colleagues near the cash register. Her voice was filled with derision. "Did you see that old man earlier? Absolutely ridiculous. Wearing a coat that looks like it's from the last century and walking in here to ask about prices. I bet he's never even seen a high-end suit before." One of her colleagues, Jose, tried to interject. "Come on, Carla. Don't say that. Everyone has the right to come in here." Carla shrugged, completely unfazed. "Sure, they have the right, but this place isn't for people like him. We have standards, and I'm just protecting the brand." Lucy, standing in a corner, couldn't stay silent any longer. She stepped forward and spoke softly but firmly. "Carla, I think we should respect everyone. That man didn't do anything wrong." Carla whipped around, her gaze sharp as a knife. "Lucy, you're just an intern here. You'd better stick to your tasks instead of lecturing others. When you achieve the kind of sales I do, then you can have an opinion." The atmosphere in the store grew tense. A few customers glanced toward the register, sensing the friction among the staff. Anthony, standing not far away, considered stepping in but hesitated. He knew Carla's arrogance and pride made her resistant to criticism. On the other side of the store, Isabel walked away from the display counter without purchasing anything. She exited the store, shaking her head in disappointment. A store like this, with staff like that, it's such a shame, she muttered. At the same time, another customer, Mr. Lewis, a well-dressed man in his 50s, had also noticed the situation. He approached Anthony and quietly said, "I don't mean to overstep, but I think you should speak to the manager. That employee's attitude is truly unacceptable." Anthony nodded, feeling conflicted. "I'll consider it, sir. Thank you for your feedback." Carla, however, remained oblivious to the events unfolding around her. She continued her work with an air of self-satisfaction, convinced that she had acted appropriately in protecting the store's brand. She had no idea that her actions had left a negative impression on many customers and colleagues. Outside, the orange hues of the sunset bathed the bustling streets of Santa Fe. Mr. Phillip, holding Martha's bouquet of flowers, walked slowly along the familiar paths. Each step seemed to carry an unspoken sorrow. A question lingered in his heart: does kindness and decency still have a place in this world? The tense atmosphere in the fashion store persisted after the incident with Mr. Phillip, but Carla remained unaware. She confidently believed she had done the right thing in upholding the store's image. As Carla walked between the clothing racks, her sharp gaze fell on customers she deemed unworthy. Lucy, standing near the counter, quietly watched Carla, her heart full of frustration but too afraid to speak up again after being scolded. Anthony, after hearing feedback from Isabel and Mr. Lewis, decided to speak with the manager. He walked into the small office at the back of the store, where Xavier, the manager, was reviewing paperwork. Xavier was a man in his 40s with graying hair and a calm demeanor, but he was also known for prioritizing sales above all else. "Anthony, what's the matter?" Xavier asked, his tone calm but revealing his preoccupation. Anthony lowered his voice, trying to keep his explanation concise. "Sir, I think we need to address Carla's behavior. She just had an unpleasant interaction with an elderly customer, and it's caused negative reactions from both customers and staff." Xavier put his pen down and crossed his arms. "Anthony, you know Carla is one of our best salespeople. She consistently delivers high numbers. I don't think a minor incident like this needs to be blown out of proportion." Anthony frowned, trying to remain calm. "But sir, if her attitude continues, it could damage the store's image. Today, at least 2 customers left without purchasing anything because they were dissatisfied with her behavior." Xavier sighed, looking at Anthony with a tired expression. "I understand your point, but you also know we can't afford to alienate employees who bring in revenue. Carla is a valuable asset. I'll talk to her, but don't expect too much." Anthony nodded, though he felt disappointed. He knew Xavier wouldn't truly address the issue. Returning to the display area, he saw Carla chatting with a group of colleagues, her face smug. "What now?" Carla asked, her tone mocking as she noticed Anthony returning. "Did you go tattle to the manager again?" Anthony didn't respond and quietly walked away. He knew that arguing with Carla would only make things worse. Outside the store, Mr. Phillip sat on a bench in a small nearby park. He silently watched children playing and golden leaves drifting in the wind. Despite his efforts to push aside the earlier incident, feelings of humiliation and loneliness lingered. An older man, Raymond, sat down next to Mr. Phillip. Raymond was a longtime friend, and the two often met at this park to chat. "Mr. Phillip, are you all right? You don't look happy," Raymond asked, his eyes filled with concern. Mr. Phillip shook his head and gave a faint smile. "It's nothing, really. I just had an unpleasant experience." Raymond tilted his head, waiting for more details. After a moment of hesitation, Mr. Phillip recounted the incident at the store. Raymond listened attentively, his expression gradually shifting to one of anger. That's unacceptable. Why would they treat you like that? You didn't do anything wrong, Raymond said, his voice indignant. Mr. Phillip shrugged. I don't blame them. Maybe it's my fault for stepping into a place that doesn't suit me. Raymond slapped his hand on the bench, his eyes blazing with frustration. No, Mr. Phillip. It's not your fault. People like her are the problem. Their arrogance and lack of respect make this world colder and more heartless. Mr. Phillip said nothing more, simply lowering his head in silence. He didn't want to continue the conversation, but Raymond's words brought him a small sense of comfort. Back at the store, a new customer walked in, a young woman named Sophia, dressed simply yet neatly. Sophia glanced around the store, clearly hesitant in the face of its luxurious atmosphere. Carla immediately noticed her, her sharp gaze sweeping over the customer. Lucy, the new customer over there is probably just like that old man earlier, Carla whispered mockingly. Lucy shook her head quietly, feeling uneasy. Meanwhile, Sophia approached a rack and admired a stunning red dress. Carla walked over, maintaining her usual fake smile. Hello, can I help you? Carla asked, her tone polite but cold. Sophia hesitated. I'd like to know the price of this dress. Carla smirked, barely concealing her disdain. This is a high-end designer piece. It's very expensive. I don't think it's suitable for you. Sophia's face flushed, and she stepped back. Oh, thank you. I just wanted to ask. Carla gave a faint laugh. If you'd like, I can show you another section with items that might be more appropriate. Though Carla's words seemed polite on the surface, they were laden with subtle insult. Sophia nodded and quietly left the store without buying anything. Once again, the atmosphere in the store grew heavy. A few other customers, having witnessed the scene, shook their heads in disapproval. From a distance, Anthony watched the exchange with growing frustration. He knew that if this continued, the store's reputation would suffer. Outside, the streetlights began to illuminate Santa Fe's bustling streets. Carla, still unaware that she had crossed a line, continued working as if nothing had happened. But seeds of dissatisfaction among customers and colleagues had already begun to sprout, smoldering like a fire waiting to ignite. The luxury fashion store continued to shine brightly, but the mood inside grew increasingly tense. After the incident with Sophia, Carla felt no remorse. On the contrary, she took pride in her belief that she had protected the brand. She walked past the cash register, glancing at Lucy, who was folding clothes. Lucy, did you see that? People like that girl never buy anything here. They're just a waste of our time, Carla said smugly. Lucy looked up, as though she wanted to say something but remained silent. Though she wanted to argue, she knew Carla would never listen. Inside, Lucy felt increasingly disheartened by Carla's way of working, but as an intern, she had no authority to speak up. Anthony, standing not far away, witnessed everything. He silently observed Carla, debating whether to escalate the matter further to Xavier, the manager. However, he also knew that Xavier would likely do nothing to change the situation. Anthony glanced at a few customers in the store and noticed them whispering to each other, their expressions filled with dissatisfaction. In the corner of the store, the middle-aged customer Louis, who had previously given feedback to Anthony, was speaking with his wife. Elena, a woman with an air of sophistication, glanced toward Carla with a look of disapproval. Louis, I think this store needs to reconsider how they hire staff. That young woman's attitude is completely unacceptable, she said in a low voice, though loud enough for Anthony to overhear. Louis nodded. I agree. We used to enjoy shopping here, but now I feel uncomfortable. Anthony could sense the growing discontent among the customers. He sighed and chose to remain silent for now to avoid further conflict. However, deep down, he knew something needed to be done. Outside, Mr. Phillip had returned to his small apartment on a quiet street. The modest but tidy space had a few old paintings hanging on the walls and a small bookshelf filled with time-worn books. Mr. Philip placed the bouquet Martha had given him into a glass vase on the table and sat down in his chair. The dim yellow light of the room softened some of his sadness, but Carla's hurtful words still echoed in his mind. Mr. Philip didn't blame Carla. Instead, he wondered if there was still a place for people like him in today's society. Perhaps I truly don't belong in this world anymore, he thought, his eyes heavy with sorrow. The sudden sound of the doorbell pulled Mr. Philip from his thoughts. He slowly got up and went to answer it. Standing there with a kind smile was Raymond, his longtime friend. "Mr. Philip, I brought you some pastries," Raymond said, holding up a small paper bag. "I thought you might need something sweet after today." Mr. Philip smiled, feeling a bit of warmth return to his heart. "Thank you, Raymond. You're very kind." Raymond stepped inside and sat down at the table with Mr. Philip. They sipped tea together and talked. Although Raymond tried to keep the mood light, he couldn't hide his frustration as they revisited the incident at the store. "Mr. Philip, you can't let this slide. That woman had no right to treat you that way," Raymond said firmly. Mr. Philip shook his head. "I don't want to make a big deal of it, Raymond. I don't want anyone to get into trouble because of me." Raymond set his teacup down on the table and looked at Mr. Philip with determination. "But if you don't speak up, she'll keep treating others like that. This isn't just about you, it's about preventing this from happening to someone else." Mr. Philip remained silent, his expression conflicted. While he wanted to forget the incident, he couldn't deny that Raymond's words held some truth. Still, he wasn't sure what he should do. Back at the store, Carla was busy showcasing a new outfit to a wealthy customer. The woman, named Teresa, was clearly impressed by Carla's confident demeanor. After a brief conversation, Teresa decided to purchase the entire outfit without hesitation. Carla beamed as she escorted Teresa to the register. While ringing up the sale, she glanced at Anthony with a smug look. "See, Anthony. This is how you do it. We just need to focus on customers who matter," Carla said, her tone full of pride. Anthony didn't respond, quietly continuing his work. He didn't want to argue with Carla, but his dissatisfaction with her methods was growing. In another corner, Lucy was diligently folding clothes. Although she longed to stand up for the customers who had been unfairly treated, she knew she didn't have enough authority as an intern. Still, the determined look in her eyes suggested she wouldn't stay silent forever. Meanwhile, some other customers in the store began whispering among themselves about Carla's attitude. A few quietly left without making any purchases, leaving the atmosphere in the store increasingly tense. Carla, despite sensing the disapproving glances around her, remained unfazed. She believed she was in the right, thinking her approach was for the benefit of the store. However, Carla was unaware that her actions had left a deep scar on Mr. Philip and had disappointed many others. The store's bright lights shone vividly, but outside, darkness had enveloped the city of Santa Fe. The chilly evening air had made the streets quieter. In a distant corner, Mr. Philip sat by his window, gazing out at the street with a pensive expression. Though the warm yellow glow of his apartment provided some comfort, his heart still felt heavy with loneliness. The next day, Carla arrived at the store with her usual radiant confidence. She stepped into the luxurious boutique, holding a latte in her hand. Morning sunlight streamed through the glass windows, creating a sparkling ambience. Carla told herself it would be another great day, confident she would continue to achieve high sales as usual. Lucy had been there since early morning, busily organizing the clothing racks. Seeing Carla enter, she greeted politely, "Good morning, Carla." Carla gave a slight nod and replied indifferently. Her eyes quickly scanned the store to assess the situation. Anthony also arrived, his demeanor as calm as ever. He said nothing, quietly observing how Carla began her work with her characteristic self-assurance. A few minutes later, the doorbell chimed, signaling the arrival of a new customer. An older man, dressed neatly but not ostentatiously, walked into the store. He was a regular customer and frequently shopped there. Carla's demeanor immediately shifted as she put on her most professional smile. "Good morning, Mr. Lewis. It's so nice to see you again. How can I assist you today?" Carla said, her voice as sweet as honey. Lewis, the middle-aged customer who had witnessed the previous incident, nodded politely but kept his gaze cautious. "I'm just looking around for now, thank you." Carla led Mr. Lewis to the new display area, showcasing several expensive items. However, Mr. Lewis didn't seem very interested. He looked around the store, as if searching for something else. His gaze landed on Lucy, the intern folding clothes in the corner. "Is that young lady a new employee?" Lewis asked, his tone gentle but clear. Carla was momentarily caught off guard but quickly regained her composure. "Yes, she's an intern. But don't worry, I'll personally assist you. She doesn't have much experience." Lewis smiled faintly, saying nothing more. He walked over to Lucy, leaving Carla uncertain about what to do next. Anthony, standing at a distance, watched the entire situation unfold with interest. "Hello, young lady," Lewis said to Lucy, his voice warm. "Would you mind helping me with a few items?" Lucy was surprised but quickly responded with a kind smile. "Of course, sir. I'd be happy to." Carla, observing the scene from afar, didn't look pleased. She felt overshadowed by the attention Mr. Lewis was giving Lucy. Internally frustrated, she decided to stay quiet and continued watching. Elsewhere in Santa Fe, Mr. Phillip sat in a familiar small cafe where he often went to read the morning paper. Today, he had brought along an old book, intending to spend some quiet time alone. However, his thoughts remained clouded by the incident from the other day. Martha, the florist from the nearby shop, happened to walk by and saw Mr. Phillip through the window. She entered the cafe with a radiant smile. "Good morning, Mr. Phillip. How are you today?" Martha asked as she pulled out a chair and sat across from him. Mr. Phillip set his book down and offered a faint smile. "Thank you, Martha. I'm doing fine." Martha observed him for a moment, sensing the lingering sadness in his expression. "You're still thinking about what happened the other day, aren't you? I hope you won't let those thoughtless words trouble you." Mr. Phillip nodded but didn't say anything. He appreciated Martha's kind intentions, but the emotional wound still stung. Despite his efforts to move on, he couldn't shake the feelings of humiliation and disregard. "You know, Mr. Phillip," Martha continued in a gentle tone, "people who lack respect for others don't realize that true value lies beyond appearances. You're a good man, and that's what truly matters." Mr. Phillip remained silent for a moment before softly saying, "Thank you, Martha. Your words mean a lot to me." Back at the store, Anthony was assisting a customer trying on a premium coat. Meanwhile, Carla stood near the cash register, her eyes still fixed on Lucy and Mr. Lewis. She couldn't understand why a regular customer like Lewis would show such interest in an inexperienced intern. Carla walked over, attempting to insert herself into their conversation. "Mr. Lewis, if you need more information about our products, I'd be happy to assist. Lucy is still learning." Lewis looked at Carla, his expression briefly showing a hint of disapproval. "Thank you, but I find Lucy very attentive and helpful. She's doing a great job." Carla didn't respond but felt a sting of hurt inside. It was the first time a customer had criticized her, even indirectly. She returned to the cash register, trying to regain her composure. After finishing his task with his customer, Anthony approached Lucy. He placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder and said gently, "You're doing great, Lucy. Don't let anyone make you doubt yourself." Lucy smiled gratefully. "Thank you, Anthony. I'm just trying to do my best." The atmosphere in the store, though still tense, began to show small signs of change. Customers like Mr. Lewis and Mrs. Elena seemed to start appreciating employees like Anthony and Lucy, who worked with genuine sincerity. Carla, despite noticing this shift, refused to acknowledge that her approach might be flawed. As the workday came to an end, Carla stood by the large window, gazing out at the street with a pensive look. She wondered whether her actions were truly right or if she had been too focused on protecting the brand's image at the expense of human values. Evening fell over Santa Fe, and the streetlights illuminated the bustling streets. Inside the fashion store, the last customers trickled out, leaving the space quieter. Carla stood by the cash register, glancing at the clock impatiently, eager for the day to end. She had achieved the highest sales in the team, which, to her, made it a perfect day. Lucy was still tidying up the clothing racks, working quietly and trying not to show her tension under Carla's watchful gaze. Anthony, as usual, stood in a corner, reviewing inventory and keeping an eye on the surroundings. Although the store was calm, a subtle heaviness lingered from the day's events. Suddenly, the chime of the doorbell rang again. An elderly man walked in. It was Mr. Phillip. He wore his old brown coat and held a felt hat in his hand. His face was calm, but his eyes carried an indescribable sadness. Anthony was the first to notice Mr. Phillip. He quickly approached with a genuine smile. "Good evening, sir. How can we assist you today?" Mr. Phillip nodded and replied in a steady voice, "I'd just like to look around." "I hope that's okay." "Of course, sir. Please feel free," Anthony said, guiding Mr. Phillip toward the display area. From a distance, Carla immediately recognized Mr. Phillip. Her expression shifted, and her eyes filled with annoyance. "It's him again," she muttered under her breath. "Why does he keep coming back here?" Lucy overheard but said nothing. She continued her work, occasionally glancing toward Mr. Phillip with a look of quiet sympathy. Mr. Phillip slowly walked around the store, his eyes scanning the carefully displayed garments. He stopped in front of a charcoal gray coat, examining every stitch and detail. It was clear he admired the design. Anthony approached him gently and asked, "You like this coat, don't you? I can get it for you to try on if you'd like." Mr. Phillip smiled but shook his head. "No need. I just want to look." Carla couldn't remain silent any longer. She stepped forward, her cold voice breaking the moment. "Sir, this coat is a high-end piece and very expensive. I think you should look at something else." Anthony turned around, his expression cautious. He looked at Carla, clearly noting the rudeness in her tone. Before he could say anything, Mr. Phillip responded calmly, "Thank you, but I only want to admire beauty." "It's fine." Carla raised an eyebrow, trying to hide a smirk. "Then, by all means, enjoy. But if I may ask, why did you come back here? This isn't a museum." Her remark left Anthony stunned. Lucy, standing a few feet away, clenched her fists to contain her anger. Neither could believe that Carla had spoken so bluntly to Mr. Phillip, a polite and elderly gentleman. Mr. Phillip remained silent for a few moments before softly replying, "I came back because I want to understand why beauty is restricted to only a few people." His response brought an unusual stillness to the room. Anthony and Lucy felt a deep respect for Mr. Phillip's composure, while Carla appeared briefly flustered but maintained her smug demeanor. "Sir," Anthony said, breaking the silence. "You have every right to be here and admire anything you like. This store exists to share beauty with everyone, not to decide who deserves it." Lucy, gathering her courage, stepped forward as well. "Sir, I'm very sorry for what happened before. I hope you don't feel hurt. You truly are an admirable person." Mr. Phillip turned to Lucy, his kind smile returning. "Thank you, young lady. You're a good person." Carla stood still, saying nothing. She felt uneasy as Anthony and Lucy's words indirectly criticized her, but she didn't know how to respond. Instead, she turned and walked back to the cash register, trying to mask her discomfort. After a little more browsing, Mr. Phillip spoke softly, "Thank you. I think it's time for me to leave. Today has been memorable." Anthony and Lucy escorted Mr. Phillip to the door, both feeling a sense of admiration and regret. As the elderly man stepped onto the bustling street, his slender figure blended into the crowd, leaving an empty space in the hearts of those who had witnessed the moment. Inside the store, Anthony looked at Carla with a stern expression. "Carla, we're not just here to sell clothes. Our job is to serve people with respect." Carla smirked. "Respect doesn't pay the bills, Anthony. I don't need anyone telling me how to do my job." Anthony sighed, shaking his head. "I think you've forgotten what's most important in this line of work." Lucy stayed silent but gave Anthony a look full of agreement. She knew that Carla's actions today wouldn't be easily forgotten. Outside, the streetlights illuminated Mr. Phillip's slow footsteps. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out an old handkerchief, gently wiping away the tears that had fallen. Although he tried to maintain his composure, his heart was heavy with sadness. Carla's words hadn't just hurt him, they made him feel isolated in an increasingly indifferent world. The next morning, sunlight poured over Santa Fe's bustling downtown. The fashion store had just opened, but the atmosphere inside was already noticeably different. The employees went about their tasks as usual, but whispers among colleagues and customers were spreading. Carla's behavior the day before had left many feeling uncomfortable, and word of it quickly reached important ears. The sound of a car engine outside the store drew everyone's attention. A sleek black luxury car pulled up in front of the glass windows. The car door opened, and a dignified man stepped out. He wore a perfectly tailored black suit, his silver hair neatly combed, and his face exuded calm authority. It was Edward, the brand's CEO and Mr. Phillip's son. Carla, standing at the cash register, glanced out the window and spotted Edward. Her eyes lit up with a mix of surprise and slight apprehension. She quickly adjusted her hair and straightened her posture, trying to maintain her usual confident demeanor. Edward entered the store, his every step exuding a commanding presence that seemed to quiet the atmosphere. All eyes turned to him. Anthony, standing near the entrance, quickly approached to greet him. "Good morning, Mr. Edward. It's an honor to have you here," Anthony said respectfully. Edward gave a slight nod, his sharp eyes scanning the store. "Good morning, Anthony. I'm here to address a matter that requires my attention." Carla approached with a bright smile. "Good morning, Mr. Edward. It's such an honor to have you visit us today. Is there anything I can assist you with?" Edward looked directly at Carla, his cold, piercing gaze making her feel uneasy. He didn't respond immediately but instead turned to Anthony and motioned for him to escort him to the manager. Anthony promptly led Edward to a small meeting room in the back. In the quiet room, Edward sat down and slowly unbuttoned his suit jacket. Xavier, the store manager, was already waiting, his demeanor tense. Edward looked at Xavier, then spoke in a deep, authoritative voice. "Xavier, I've been informed about what happened yesterday. I need you to explain why one of our employees behaved so disrespectfully toward a customer." Xavier lowered his head, sweat beading on his forehead. "Mr. Edward, I deeply apologize for this incident. Carla is a good employee, but I will get to the bottom of this and address it seriously." Edward placed his hand on the table, his tone sharper. "A good employee is not just someone who brings in sales. They must represent the values of this brand. And this brand was built on respect and kindness, values that my father, Mr. Phillip, instilled from the very beginning." Xavier looked up, his face turning pale. "Your father?" Edward nodded, his gaze growing more profound. "Yes. The man Carla disrespected and insulted yesterday is my father, Mr. Phillip, the founder of this brand." The room fell into silence. Xavier didn't dare look Edward in the eye, while Anthony, standing in the corner, felt both surprised and indignant on behalf of Mr. Phillip. Edward continued, his voice filled with sternness. This brand is not just about expensive clothes. It's a symbol of effort and compassion. But what happened yesterday shows that we're straying from those values. Xavier bowed his head, stammering, "Sir, I truly didn't know Mr. Phillip was your father. If I had known, I wouldn't have let this happen." Edward interrupted, his voice cold, "This isn't about identity. Even if my father weren't the founder, he still deserved to be treated with respect, just like any other customer." He stood up, his sharp eyes fixed on Xavier. "Bring Carla here immediately." Xavier quickly left the room, his face showing clear panic. Just a few moments later, Carla entered, her expression uneasy but trying to maintain a confident demeanor. She looked at Edward, forcing a smile. "Mr. Edward, I'm very sorry if anything I did yesterday was inappropriate." Edward raised his hand, cutting her off. "Carla, do you know that the man you insulted yesterday is my father?" Edward's question left Carla frozen. She stammered, her eyes darting. "Sir, I didn't know. If I had known, I would have." Edward continued, his tone severe. "If you had known, what would you have done? Treated him kindly because he's my father? So if he were just an ordinary person, you think you had the right to insult him?" Carla lowered her head, unable to respond. Her usual smugness vanished, replaced by confusion and anxiety. Edward stepped closer, his cold gaze piercing through her. "I will not tolerate anyone undermining the values of this brand. Carla, as of this moment, you are no longer an employee of this company." Edward's words cut through the room like a knife. Carla looked up, her eyes wide with shock. "Sir, please, give me another chance. I didn't mean to." Edward shook his head, his tone firm. "You didn't mean to, but your actions caused deep harm to someone you had no right to judge. I hope this serves as a lesson for you to understand that respect isn't tied to status or appearance." Carla bowed her head, tears streaming down her face, but she didn't dare say anything more. Edward turned away, signaling Xavier to escort her out of the store. Anthony and Lucy, standing outside, watched Carla leave with a mix of pity and relief. Her arrogance had finally caught up with her. Carla walked out of the store in a daze, tears rolling down her cheeks. The handbag hanging loosely on her shoulder felt heavier than ever. She had always taken pride in her confidence and position at the store, but now, everything had crumbled in an instant. Carla walked slowly down the bustling street, but inside her was an empty void. Edward's piercing gaze and his sharp words echoed in her mind like a wake-up call. Inside the store, the atmosphere lightened after Carla's departure. Edward stood in the center of the room, his eyes sweeping over the employees, as if to reaffirm that he was there not just to deal with Carla but to reinforce the values of the brand. "Anthony, Lucy," Edward called, his voice calm but authoritative. The two quickly stepped forward. Lucy looked slightly nervous, while Anthony maintained a composed expression. Edward looked at them, a faint smile appearing on his face. "You two did very well," Edward said, his tone warmer. "I've heard about how you tried to uphold respect for my father, Mr. Phillip. I want to thank you both for that." Lucy exhaled a sigh of relief, her cheeks flushing with emotion. "Sir, I just believe that everyone deserves respect. I'm so sorry about what happened yesterday." Edward nodded, his gaze softening. "It's precisely this attitude that makes me confident the future of this store will be brighter with people like you." He turned to Anthony, giving him a light pat on the shoulder. "Anthony, I need you to take on the position of interim manager. Are you ready for that?" Anthony looked momentarily surprised but quickly composed himself. He nodded firmly. "I'm ready, sir. I'll do my best." Edward smiled in approval, then turned to Xavier, the current manager. "Xavier, I need you to attend a retraining session on store management. We cannot let incidents like this happen again. I hope you understand the importance of this. Xavier bowed his head, hearing the disappointment in Edward's voice. Yes, sir. I understand, and I'll follow your instructions. Edward stepped into the center of the store, scanning the display space. Adjusting his suit jacket, he raised his voice just enough for all employees to hear. This brand doesn't just sell clothes. We sell confidence, self-respect, and human values. Anyone who steps into this store must be treated with respect, regardless of who they are, what they wear, or how much money they have. The room fell silent as everyone listened intently, absorbing Edward's every word. No one dared to object because what he said was undeniably true. Lucy, standing in a corner, felt a sense of pride welling up inside her. These were the values she had always believed in. That afternoon, Edward invited Mr. Phillip to return to the store. A sleek black car pulled up to the entrance, and Mr. Phillip stepped out with an air of simplicity yet undeniable dignity. He wore his familiar old coat, leaning on a wooden cane, but his gentle eyes radiated calmness. Anthony, Lucy, and the other employees quickly lined up to greet him. The atmosphere inside the store suddenly grew unusually warm. Edward walked over to take his father's hand, smiling. "Father, I am deeply sorry for what happened. Today, I invited you here so everyone could have the opportunity to apologize and show their respect." Mr. Phillip looked at his son and nodded slightly. "You don't need to apologize, Edward. I don't blame anyone. But if you believe this is a chance for everyone to learn a lesson, I am more than willing." Edward turned to Anthony and Lucy. "Can you two help my father tour the store? I think he'd like to learn more about this space." Anthony nodded and led Mr. Phillip through each section of the store. Meanwhile, Lucy introduced him to the latest clothing collections and designs. Mr. Phillip couldn't hide his amazement at their dedication and hospitality. He looked at Lucy, his eyes full of approval. "Young lady, you are truly kind-hearted. You are the hope of the next generation," Mr. Phillip said, his voice filled with gratitude. Lucy smiled, her eyes glistening with emotion. "Thank you, sir. I just try to do what is right." When the tour ended, Edward stood in the center of the store with his father. Turning to the employees and customers present, he spoke loudly, "I want everyone to know that my father, Mr. Phillip, is not just the founder of this brand but also a symbol of the values we strive to uphold. Kindness, humility, and respect for others, these are the principles we must preserve." The store fell silent for a moment, then applause erupted. The customers present, surprised by the revelation, couldn't hide their admiration. Standing beside his son, Mr. Phillip gave a modest yet powerful bow to everyone. Edward turned to Anthony and Lucy, raising his voice again, "Today, we didn't just correct a mistake, we learned how to honor the true value of humanity. This is a lesson for all of us." Mr. Phillip approached Lucy and took her hand. "You are a gem. Hold on to your belief in kindness." Lucy bowed slightly, her heart swelling with pride. Standing beside her, Anthony gently patted her shoulder, his eyes full of encouragement. In that moment, everyone felt a positive shift in the store's atmosphere. The afternoon slowly passed, but the luxurious fashion store retained its warm and respectful ambience following Mr. Phillip's presence. Employees, customers, and even manager Xavier clearly felt that the brand's core values had been powerfully reaffirmed through Edward's actions. However, the day wasn't over yet, as one final surprise awaited. As Edward conversed with Mr. Phillip in the center of the store, a familiar customer unexpectedly arrived. It was Mrs. Isabel, a regular middle-aged customer who had previously voiced her dissatisfaction with Carla's attitude. She entered with confident poise, wearing an elegant navy evening gown. Spotting Edward, she smiled and approached him. "Mr. Edward, it's a pleasure to see you here. I heard you were visiting the store today, and I felt it was necessary to say a few words," Isabel said, her voice clear and authoritative. Edward smiled, gesturing for Mrs. Isabel to take a seat in the nearby leather lounge area. Mrs. Isabel, it's wonderful to see you. Please, go ahead. Isabel nodded, her eyes serious. I've always known this store for its excellence and outstanding customer service. But what I witnessed the other day with Carlo left me disappointed. I want to thank you for taking decisive action to uphold the brand's values. However, I'd like to offer a suggestion. Edward leaned forward, listening intently. I'd be very interested in hearing your thoughts. Isabel smiled faintly and continued, I believe it's crucial not only to address individual employees but also to build a culture where everyone, employees and customers alike, feels respected. I think you should consider organizing more training sessions focused on customer service with compassion and empathy. Edward nodded, his expression showing agreement. Mrs. Isabel, I truly appreciate your advice. In fact, what you've mentioned aligns with our upcoming plans. I want to make this place a model, not just for fashion but also for how people treat one another. Isabel smiled with satisfaction, then turned to Mr. Philip. And I must say, Mr. Philip, you are an incredible inspiration to all of us. It's an honor to meet you today. Mr. Philip smiled modestly and replied, Thank you, Mrs. Isabel. I'm just someone who loves beauty and believes it should be for everyone. When the conversation ended, Edward stood up, looking around the store with pride in his eyes. He turned to Xavier and Anthony and spoke loudly. Today, I want to make an important announcement. From now on, all of our employees will participate in advanced training sessions on customer service skills and respect. At the same time, I'd like to introduce a small change that carries great significance. He walked over to the display counter, where the premium coats were showcased, and pointed to the coat Mr. Philip had admired the other day. This coat will be renamed Mr. Philip, to honor my father and the values he has instilled in this brand. Applause erupted throughout the store. Anthony and Lucy exchanged a look, their eyes filled with agreement. They understood that from this day forward, the store would not just sell clothes but would also uphold noble values. A little later, Edward left the store with Mr. Philip. Before getting into the car, Edward turned to Anthony and Lucy and said, I have great faith in both of you. Keep working with passion and kindness. We need more people like you to help this brand grow. Lucy, feeling emotional, bowed her head in response. Thank you, Mr. Edward. We will do our best. Anthony nodded, his eyes steady. We won't let you down. The car drove away, leaving behind an atmosphere of excitement and hope in the store. Lucy returned to the cashier's counter, where Anthony was reorganizing the records. Anthony, do you think everything that happened from yesterday to today will change the atmosphere here? Lucy asked, her voice full of hope. Anthony smiled and replied, I believe so. Sometimes the most important lessons come from painful events. I believe that starting today, we'll be working in a better place. That evening, Mr. Philip sat by the window of his small apartment, gazing out at the bustling streets of Santa Fe. The golden streetlights illuminated the corner, creating a warm and inviting scene. On the table, the bouquet of flowers Martha had given him remained fresh, a gentle reminder that kindness exists everywhere. He held the coat Edward had given him, the coat he had admired in the store. Its fine stitching and soft material were impeccable. But more than that, he knew it wasn't just a material gift. It was a symbol of the understanding and gratitude his son felt for him. Mr. Philip smiled softly and whispered, Edward, you've done well. I'm proud of you. In the small room, the gentle light spread throughout the space, dispelling all sorrows. And outside, the city of Santa Fe thrived, as if affirming that kindness and respect endure, whether in the most luxurious places or the simplest corners. The story underscores a powerful lesson about respect and the true value of humanity, beyond appearances or social status. Treating others kindly is not just a matter of courtesy but reflects our character and core values. Arrogance and disrespect, as demonstrated by Carla's behavior, ultimately lead to deserved consequences. In contrast, the sincere and kind actions of Anthony, Lucy, and Mr. Philip show that compassion can bring about positive change, affirming that true beauty begins within the soul.
If you enjoyed this story, we invite you to give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Your support motivates us to keep bringing heartwarming stories almost every day. We are very grateful for your support. See you soon.